It's the second week of July, and you've just cut open a watermelon you picked out an hour ago. The rind looked fine, the shape looked right, but the flesh inside is pale, more pink than red, and when you take a bite, it's mostly water. A little sweetness at the very center, and that's it. The rest goes back in the fridge, and most of it ends up in the compost 2 days later. Maybe you've stood at that counter too. Maybe you've thought, well, that's just how it goes sometimes. You win some, you lose some, and there's no real way to tell from the outside. I want to push back on that a little. There's a reason this keeps happening, and it isn't bad luck. It's that almost nobody walks into a store or a field and actually checks the melon before they buy it. They look at the shape, maybe knock on it once, and hope. There's a way to tell, before you ever cut into it, whether a watermelon is going to be sweet and red all the way through, or pale and watery. It's not a trick, and it's not luck. It's 5 things you check, in about a minute, standing right there at the bin, or in your own garden bed. I'm going to walk through all 5 today, what to look for, what to feel for, and what to listen for. None of it requires a tool, and none of it requires guessing. By the end of this, you'll be able to pick up almost any watermelon and know, with real confidence, whether it's worth taking home. My name's Caleb. I keep a garden out behind the house. Nothing fancy, just a handful of raised beds, and a patch out back where I let things sprawl a bit, which is exactly what watermelon vines want to do. I started growing them a few years back, mostly because my kids kept asking for them. And store-bought ones were such a gamble that I figured I'd rather just grow my own and know what I was getting. The funny thing is, growing them taught me more about picking them than anything else could have, because when you've watched a melon develop on the vine for 10 weeks, you start noticing the same signs the old farmers always talked about, the ones that tell you a melon is ready, whether it's still on the vine in your own garden or sitting in a bin at the store. So let's get into it. Here's what I check, every single time. First, the field spot. Every watermelon has one spot on it where it sat against the ground while it grew. On a ripe melon, that spot turns a deep, creamy yellow, sometimes almost orange. That color only develops after the melon has spent real time ripening in the sun. On an unripe melon, that same spot is pale white, or even still green. That tells you the melon was pulled before it had finished. So turn the melon over, find that ground spot, and look for that deep, buttery yellow. White or green underneath means set it back. Second, the webbing. If you look closely at the rind, especially near the stem end, you'll sometimes see a rough, brown, almost scarred-looking patch, like a spiderweb pattern pressed into the skin. That webbing is actually a sign of pollination activity. Bees visited that blossom a lot, which usually means the plant had good growing conditions, and the melon had a strong start. More webbing tends to mean a sweeter melon. A perfectly smooth rind with no webbing at all isn't a bad sign by itself, but if you're choosing between 2 melons and one has noticeably more webbing, that's the one I'd pick. Third, the tendril. If you're picking straight from the vine. Right near where the melon's stem connects to the vine, there's a little curly tendril, like a thin green spring. While the melon is still ripening, that tendril is green and flexible. As the melon finishes ripening, that tendril dries out, turns brown and curls up tight. A brown, dried, curled tendril is one of the most reliable signs that a melon is ready to come off the vine. If it's still green, give it more time. Fourth, shape and weight. A good watermelon should feel heavier than you expect for its size. Pick it up. If it feels surprisingly light, there's a good chance the inside hasn't filled out the way it should. Sometimes from uneven watering, sometimes from being harvested early. As for shape, you want something symmetrical, round or oblong, but even. A lopsided melon, with one side noticeably bigger or flatter than the other, usually means it didn't get even sunlight or even water while it was growing, and the flesh inside can be uneven too, sweet in one half, bland in the other. Fifth, and this is the one most people have heard of but don't actually use correctly, the thump test. Knock on the melon with your knuckles, the same way you'd knock on a door. You're listening for a deep, hollow, almost drum-like sound. If it sounds dull and flat, more like knocking on a solid block of wood, that usually means the melon is underripe. The flesh is still dense and hasn't developed that juicy texture yet. If it sounds deep and resonant, almost like a low drum, that's what you want. So that's the 5, the field spot. Deep yellow, not white. The webbing, more is generally better. The tendril, brown and curled, means ready. The weight and shape, heavy for its size, evenly shaped. And the thump, a deep, hollow sound, not a flat thud. Any one of these on its own tells you something. But when 2 or 3 of them line up, say, a deep yellow field spot, good webbing, and that hollow drum sound, that's about as close to a guarantee as you're going to get without cutting it open. Quick thing before we move on. If you want more of this kind of practical, no-nonsense growing and picking knowledge, I put together a short weekly note where I share what's working and what isn't in my own garden that week. The link's in the description if that's something you'd like. All right, now let's talk about why all this actually matters when it comes to your matters. Grocery bill. Let's say a family buys 2 watermelons a week through June, July, and August. About 13 weeks, so 26 melons a season. At an average of $6 each, that's roughly $156 over the summer. If even a third of those melons turn out pale and disappointing, and for a lot of households, that's a fair estimate. That's close to $50 spent on melons that mostly get thrown out or fed to the chickens. Once you're checking the field spot, the webbing, the tendril if you're growing your own, the weight, and the thump, that number drops close to 0. Same money, same 26 melons, but almost every single one of them is the kind you actually want to eat. That's not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of things, but it adds up over a summer, and more than that, it's the difference between a kid taking 1 bite and pushing the plate away, or a kid asking for seconds. Here's what I'd ask you to try this week. Next time you're at the store or out in your own patch, take the extra minute. Turn it over, look at that field spot. Run your hand over the rind and feel for webbing. Pick it up and feel the weight. Give it that knuckle thump. It costs you nothing, and it takes less time than picking out a bag of chips. I'd love to know, which of these 5 did you already know about, and which one was new to you? Drop it in the comments. And if your family's got their own way of picking a melon, something passed down that we didn't cover here, share it. I read every comment, and honestly, some of the best tips I've ever gotten have come from people in the comments section. Next time, I want to do the same thing for cantaloupe, because the tests are different, and there's one in particular that almost nobody checks, even though it's the most important one of all. If this was useful to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you've got 30 seconds, tap that like button too. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are tired of cutting open disappointing melons. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the garden.